Hey,
Hi.
how's it going, everybody?
Hello. We're
All
live.
right. Good to be back. All right, here we are. We are UFO believers. The UFOB team is here. We have Ed here from the UK over there up in black, and we have Trimag, Remzi, myself, and Undead Gaucho here again. Thank you for being here, Undead Gaucho. And of course, Victor Viggiani. I want to say Victor Viggiani in my Italian voice. But Victor is here. It's so great to have Victor here, and he's going to give us his thoughts on the UAP report. And just for those who don't know Victor, again, Victor is currently the news director of Zland Communications, an international news service. He's host of FDA, the Files of Disclosure Agency, and Victor works to advance the exposure of classified and declassified government UFO documents to engage mainstream media and the public in the political imperatives and implications of the full acknowledgement and disclosure by government of the ET UFO presence now engaging the planet. So, Victor, we noted that the UAP report is also called the preliminary assessment of the unidentified aerial phenomenon. It is an unclassified report. So, let us know what you think about that, and tell us what's going on.
Well, the idea, and thanks for having me on, guys. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
The idea behind the word preliminary was sort of I guess it was a throwaway phrase that they had to introduce. And the information that I have is that it would not have been to their advantage to, you know, spread out all the cards on the table. So they decided to put up, I think it was 9 pages, and three of which were just a cover and some other things. So in essence, it was just 6 pages of just an admission of what everybody has already known for since 2017. There's really nothing new there at all. The only thing that is new, as far as I'm concerned, is the fact that they've openly acknowledged um, these craft of unknown origin. They've openly acknowledged, and that's a big step. There are a lot of people out there in the UFO research community who are kind of dumping on the report and saying, well, it's just a continuation of the secrecy, and they're trying to control the issue, threat narrative, et cetera, et cetera. And I can't dismiss those ideas. They are all part and parcel of how the national intelligence community operates. They're not going to tell you the whole story right off the bat. But when you think about what's been going on over the past 60 to 65 years within the media and within the research community, especially the media, we have been waiting. When I say we, those people who've been on this since the late 60s and 70s all the way up until now, we have been wanting this situation for 70 years, and now it's here. It's right in front of us. So we got what we asked for. We got a government acknowledgement that these craft of unknown origin are real. They don't know what they are. They've acknowledged that. They're still afraid to use the E word, which I don't blame them for. So we're in a really good position as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of people within the UFO research community feel that way. We're in a pretty good position. Now, there's still a lot of work to do, but the fact that they've acknowledged that this whole thing is a major, major step forward. And anyone who wants to critique that, as far as I'm concerned, really is not in the ballpark of understanding what this is all about. The second point is that for the first time in the media history, we have virtually every single, and people have to really understand this, uh, every single major uh, corporation, news corporation, cable news network, newspaper, uh, every one of them, anybody who is a major media outlet is covering this issue. And that's something we have not seen in the last 70 years. And they're not just covering sort of UFOs and with a smirk on their face. They're diving right into this issue. They're diving into the fact that it's been kept secret for so long. So we really have an advantage in saying to ourselves, major media is covering this. I don't know if anybody ever watched it or has watched it, but I think it was the night before last, Thursday or Wednesday or Thursday night. I'm not sure if people have watched MSNBC before. I mean, I tune into MSNBC a lot. That's one of the first things I tune into as far as major media is concerned, because they have great coverage in a lot of ways. But in any case, one of the correspondents, his name is Ari Melber. He's on from 6 o'clock to 7 every night during the week, Monday to Friday, and he covered this thing. Now he didn't cover it the way I wanted him to. I mean, that's really not in the cards now. but he did a great job of, first of all, acknowledging the report. He held it up. He had a physical paper copy of it. And for someone on MSNBC or a major news outlet to hold a copy of a government report on UFOs or UAP, that is a major step forward. It's never happened before. So what do we do with that? We have to take advantage of the fact that the major media outlets are covering this stuff and provide for them a better understanding of their really inadequate, as far as I'm concerned, inadequate coverage that they're doing right now. I saw an interview of on CNN the other day with a young lady trying to get information out from one of the former senators, and her questions were very, very simplistic, very, very. They lacked depth. They lacked any kind of knowledge about this issue. So what we see here are a group of, and I'm including all the media, perhaps except 60 Minutes, with a total amount of ignorance on this issue. They're uninformed. They're uneducated about this. We've been around the block on this for, you guys for a long time, and me longer. We've been around the block for many, many years on this issue. These guys are just stepping into the pool. They're putting their big toe in the pool for the very first time. So they have no idea what's going on. They have no fundamental research. They've not examined the documentation. They don't know who Roscoe Hillenkotter was, the first director of the CIA, talking back in the late '60s or mid '60s about the government knowledge of this stuff. And he called at that time for congressional hearings way back in the '60s. They don't know anything about that. All they're talking about is the stuff that's happened over the past, 6 or 7 years. That's all they're dealing with. So when the media is that uneducated about this, we have a responsibility to bring forward good educational material and bring them up to speed with what we know about this. So it is a preliminary report. There's much more to come. There's a big update coming. My understanding is that within 90 days, there's going to be another update of the congressional members. So we're looking forward to that too. And it's an open book on this, and we still have a lot to do.
Great.
Any questions?
A lot of questions. Yeah. Undead.
Hey, I just wanted to say, Victor, what do you think about focusing on the past? Like when 2017 happened, the one thing I did was I said, okay, now I have to really zero in on the past and think about it all over again. I need to analyze it all over again because now we're at a new point. It's a new discussion. And a lot of people are saying, I've heard people say, don't focus on the past, focus on what's happening now and the conversation now. And I've been a bit I've just been sticking to my roots. So I've been going back to the past a lot more than ever. So what do you think about that? Do you think it's important?
No, I think we don't want to get tied up in the past. That's something that we have to avoid doing. We can't sort of become totally focused on it. But I think we do have to remind ourselves and remind everybody that there is a dense history to this issue. And if we're not, and no one right now at this point who's just getting into this issue, news media or people that have just opened the book on this, or I've watched, Ari Melba for the very first time, we can't expect those individuals and people within the media, especially journalists, to be completely up to speed on this right now. There's just no way they can do it. They'd have to spend, in all honesty, they'd have to spend 6 months, 6 full months, 24/7 to get up to speed to the way to where most of us are at, and that's an unrealistic expectation as far as I'm concerned. But we do have to be aware that there is a rich history of what's gone on with respect to sighting reports, with respect to pilot testimony. I mean, the pilot testimony that's come out within the past 3 or 4 years that's being hyped in the UAP report. There's been tons of pilot reports before, so we should focus on those and realize that they're there. And this is not the first time this kind of stuff has ever been available to the public. It's been available to the public for 65 years, if not longer. And if anyone wants to get up to speed, especially journalists, the general public will eventually be informed, as this thing unfolds. But if journalists want to get up to speed, they have to become totally informed. And that's one of the things that I'm attempting to do is provide journalists with good information to say, have a look at this and put it in the context of what's happening right now. And for any journalist and I see this on CNN a lot for some reason. I'm not sure why, and even Fox News. They think that the UFO issue started, in 2007. That's when they think it started, and that belief system, that worldview, that this is just on our front doorstep since 12 or 13 years ago, and they're sadly mistaken. So what they also don't understand is that the secrecy issue has been going on for 75 years. A dense wall of secrecy has been around them. That's why they don't know about it. So what are we doing right now with people in the Senate and in the Congress and with uneducated news media journalists? What they're saying is right now, how long has this been going on, and why don't I know about it? And that shows their ignorance. But
Yeah.
I'm glad they're asking the question. That's great. So we have to bring them up to speed and get them to a point where we understand what the history was. Have a look at this document. Have a look at this era of things, and have a look at talk to these people about it. Read these reports. Have a look at these documents. Look at what Richard Dolan has done. Read one of his books. Have a look at what John Mack has spoken to us about. Have a look at what the nuclear. We'll talk about this later. Please remind me to keep it on the DS. Is talk about this nuclear tampering issue. We've got to talk about that one. And the media has no idea about this. So there's so many things, so many weeds that are growing in the garden that people just aren't willing to admit that are there. So focusing on the past is a good thing, but we don't want to get too knee deep in it because we're going to lose a lot of people. It
Yeah.
might be good to get some sort of documentation that says, well, here's 5 different things that you should know. And if you know these 5 things, whatever they might be, it'll kind of bring you up to speed on what's going on. So a good journalist who wants to find out more will delve into those things and do the research on it. So I think that's what we got to do. Use the past, use history to bring people up to speed with what's going on right now. So what we've got
Exactly.
then is a good context for people to understand what's going on now because of what happened, in the last 65 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you answered my question. That was my next question is how are you helping to spread this information to journalists and just as you said, there's like
Mm-hmm.
you can put 5 things, the secrecy and so on. Um, and I also just wanted to also I just wanted to say I wish I could just give most journalists just the link to say the citizens hearing that just came out about from 2013, of course,
Yeah.
about documents and proof. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
just overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
amazing, and like you said, we just can't expect them to be up to speed
Mm-hmm.
at least for another 6 months. Because I would hope that places like MSNBC or any other news outlet
Mm-hmm.
take one of their journalists and say, okay, we want you to. I know it's crazy, but let's do
Mm-hmm.
this. You need
Yeah.
to focus
Yeah.
on this, see what we've got. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry. Go ahead, Victor.
No, it's a great point because the citizen hearings, uh, the whole length of it. I was there for all 5 days, so I saw and heard virtually everything went on. I was there first thing in the morning. I didn't leave there till 6 o'clock at night every single day, and spent time with the speakers and with Steve and with Danny Sheehan and with Richard Dolan and with Paul Hellyer and talking after dinner about all this stuff. So we were all well entwined by this. And the way that they are pushing things forward, or the way they pushed things forward, brought me to the point where I was sitting at lunch with one of the congressmen. I think it was Merrill. Oh gosh, I forget his last name. In any case, we're sitting on a round table. There's 10 of us at the table, and he was at the very beginning. He was very doubtful. He was, not on board. Oh, wait, I don't understand why I'm here. Why this is all coming, forward. What's really going on? And I said, just wait. Wait. Don't make any judgments till you hear what's going on. And then we had lunch again on the Thursday following it. He had completely done a 180 on this, to the point where he said publicly to the entire room of 540 people and to the witnesses, I want those files out. And he was completely convinced about the issue. So what happened there is that he was brought up to speed within 5 days. And it's really important to understand that once you do the research, listen to 1 hour of it. Just listen to 1 hour of any of the testimony, and you'll become convinced that this is, in fact, the biggest story in human history. And that's why I think people in NBC and CBS and all the other, the other cable news outlets, all they have to do is watch 1 hour of that, and they'll come out of
Yes.
there scratching their head and saying, like I said earlier, and I keep on repeating this, how long has this been going on, and why don't we
Yeah.
know about it?
Well,
So they've had
just like, go ahead,
no,
please.
they've had their head in the sand for a while, and now they're coming up for air and realizing that these things are in the sky, and they haven't paid attention to the whole issue, not just the lights in the sky, but the lies on the ground. So it's all part of their educational process, and I'm just hoping that that smoothens itself out to a point where we get these really, really good journalists, some of whom are completely out to lunch on this, but they're good journalists, and realize there's a big story here. And if any one of them picks it up for their newspaper, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Politico, there's a there's a Pulitzer Prize in there for somebody. So
Yeah.
it's going to happen sooner or later. So just a matter
John
of
Mack
time.
had it first.
Yeah, we have to, yeah, that's where it's got to go. I mean, there's no other way for this to go. There really is no other way. The other night we were involved in a conversation with Grant Cameron and Danny Sheehan, and just about 5 people involved in this whole thing. And we were talking about just like this, very similar kind of format. And so they asked me for my input. So I said, we're in a position now. Over the past while, we've been pushing this car, the disclosure car, up a very steep hill. We're all there, pushing the car up the hill and inch by inch, and then we eventually, right now, we got this thing to the top of the hill, and we're just pushing it over the edge. But the military industrial complex has still got their foot on the brake. So now we're trying to push the car down the hill. And so what we got to do is get the government to take their foot off the brake and just let this car roll down the hill, and everything will be disclosed in good due time. It's not all going to come at once, but at least the push will be a little bit easier, a little bit more informative, so that we're not just listening to what the government is saying. We're listening to the people like the Richard Dolans of the world, like the Steve Bassett's. Those are the people who've yet to get on the newscasts. We have yet to get those people on the cable news, other than Luis Elizondo and Chris Mellon, who've only been around for a short period of time, relatively speaking. Like Richard Dolan started doing this in the 1980s, and Bassett's been doing it the same amount of time. So they are washed in this information, whereby we're just listening to people who've only been involved with this for maybe 8 or 10 years. And that's not a good place to start with everything. It's good for some things, government acknowledgement, that's great. But the history of this and what's been going on and what the long-term implications are for the human family, no one's even addressing that issue right now.
And I heard that one person was replaced just before the UAP task force report was coming out. So they they had
there's
not,
all kinds of stuff going on there. It's
very strange.
yeah. Well, right now, what the big problem is, a very big problem at this point in time, is that Luis Elizondo. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but Luis Elizondo has been under consistent attack from the Pentagon by one of the directors within the Pentagon. I don't know what her title is, but her name is Susan Goff.
Yeah,
And she has been putting out a false narrative about who Luis Elizondo is and what his role was. And she is on the record as saying there's no documentation of Luis Elizondo being in the Pentagon, being part of the ATIP program, or being the executive director of the program, or being the security officer for the program. There's no evidential material that he was involved in ATIP at all. And that,
And then
in
Harry
fact,
Reid wrote. I'm sorry. And then Harry Reid wrote a letter.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's absolute balderdash. It's an absolute blatant lie. So what's happening now is, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but I think your audience should know that Luis Elizondo is fighting back. And what he's done is he's employed the services of constitutional and Watergate lawyer Daniel P. Sheehan. You guys all know who Daniel is, obviously.
Yes.
So what Luis has done, he's asked Danny to be his representative. And last June the 15th, he and Luis Elizondo, I was supposed to have an interview with Danny on that day, but he was not available because he and Luis Elizondo went to Washington. They flew to Washington and they went into the office of the Inspector General of the United States. Okay, digest that for a second. Right into that office, and the two of them. They had a 4-hour meeting with, I believe, 4 other lawyers from the Inspector General's office, and they sat down with these people for 4 hours, And Daniel Sheehan's point was, let's start from the beginning, because they filed a complaint with the director, with the inspector general on May the 3rd, saying, stop, the Pentagon must stop attacking Luis Elizondo, because he was part of it. He was part of ATIP. He was an integral part of it from 2007 to 2012. He was the security officer for it and the executive director. So let's lay that to rest and acknowledge that that in fact has happened, and that Susan Goff is lying to the public. Let's get that on the table and discuss it. So apparently that
Yes.
took them the 4 hours to discuss. Now they're going to go back to them again. Well, first of all, let me state that if the Pentagon or the Office of the Inspector General did not um, accede to that request by them to have the Pentagon stop doing this, that Luis Elizondo and Danny Sheehan would actually sue the Pentagon for false claims and for defamation. Okay, so that's what happened then. So they kind of got some agreement as to what was going to go on next. So I believe they are supposed to meet within the next 30 days to resolve other issues about what's gone on within the Department of Defense, within the Pentagon, to say, listen, ATIP program was a real program. Luis is part of it. Let's start examining how this information is going to come out, because Luis Elizondo has some intense information about this, and he's not going to back off. So that's where it's at right now, and it's very, very important. So this is all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes that no one knows about. You tell this to a journalist, it won't make sense to them because they have no history about this. So it's important that that you guys and the people that are listening to this, realize there's so much going on behind the scenes. So that's an important factor in where we need to go next within this whole thing.
Yeah.
Can I ask something real quick from everybody?
Sure.
Something I was thinking about literally today. Luis Elizondo, I feel like he's a great example of somebody that's pioneering this new step and pushing us into this new era, right? This new version of disclosure that I don't think a lot of people are ready for, right? And I was thinking about the past again, right? Because I always use it as a reference. Like, I don't forget it. You know, it's like
a good place to start, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about how when I was a kid or when I was younger and looking into this topic, it was almost like dangerous to be a whistleblower, right? It was dangerous. Like, you could get
Jailed.
yeah.
If you're military, if you're in military, you could go to jail in the 80s.
You could go
I
to
think.
jail,
Yeah.
but then there were all, there's also the stories of people getting, disappeared or wiped out. I don't want to say it in the wrong way,
sure.
but
What
and I
works?
was thinking about Lou, wet works, and I was thinking about Lou, and I was thinking about how often he's been speaking and all the different channels he's been going on and how hard he's pushing this message. And I thought, what would you do if you felt like, something was coming against you, like the Pentagon or like, this kind of situation? I'm going to be honest. I would get my face everywhere I could, and I would say everything I could at all times, clearly and honestly, to try to make it like, okay, if anything happens, then everyone will know why something happened to me.
Right.
Even though I'm going to clarify, I'm not saying that that's how I think it works today. I think it works much differently, because today you can ruin someone's life by just leaking their emails. You don't need to put them in a trunk and throw them in the desert anymore. It's much easier than that.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw. Did you see Lou's interview with Kurt Jaimungal? I don't want to mess his last name up. Jaimungal, I think it is. But the Theories of Everything.
Yeah.
Really good interview. But he mentioned he's telling us all he can. Louis mentioned he's telling us all he can, without telling anything he shouldn't, because it's his code. It's the code, military code. He knows better. But it seems like he's doing what you're saying. He's telling us everything he can. So good on him for that.
I don't know. I'm asking you guys if you think he's telling us everything he can, but he's also smart, because I would be smart in that position, especially if I am a man with his background, and I would be trying to put my face all over the place to protect protect myself.
He's had like 70 interviews. I think he's doing whether he means to or not. He's certainly doing that. There's no doubt about that.
CNN, Fox. He's been all over
he's
the
everywhere,
news, and it's awesome. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's bad.
Sure.
I'm just saying, if I was a guy that was like, okay, some crazy stuff is happening in the background. I'm being threatened in certain ways. What I'm going to do, like Bob Lazar did supposedly, right? Bob Lazar said, "Oh, I went to the news because I thought
Yeah.
if I was on the news, nothing would happen to me." And that's exactly what you do. And
But originally Bob was anonymous, and then he came
he
out.
was anonymous. That's very
Yeah,
true.
he
Very
started
true.
anonymous as David, if I remember correctly.
That's very
I
true.
could be
Yeah, I
wrong.
remember.
I'm sure. Yeah.
No, I remember seeing that video where he's in the back of the van. He's like
Yeah.
all blacked out with the
Yep.
silhouette of the window of the
Yeah.
van.
He was anonymous
But
at first as
I
well.
think those days are pretty much over. I think unless
yeah,
there's somebody in the back rooms of this, and there obviously there could be somebody who's has been in a room with alien bodies or live aliens. I mean, I'm not going to dismiss that possibility. I really do not believe that bodies have been absent from this whole picture, or meetings with absolutely live extraterrestrials. I don't know
Well,
how deep that would be, but I will definitely not discount the possibility of that. So if there's
well,
someone in that kind of position,
yeah.
um, I don't think that they will fear coming forward as much as they might have feared it 40 years ago.
Well, Victor, I was
yeah,
going to say to that. Sorry, John. I was going to say to that in the 2013 hearings. I believe it was Robert Wood who had that Majestic 12 booklet saying it was is brought out in 1954.
Hmm.
So Roswell had already happened, and they had already figured out the procedures for making sure you can retrieve a crashed vehicle as
Right.
well as with bodies. And then they even mentioned that they believe there were up to 70 crash retrievals.
Oh yeah.
It's like that's. Can we have another hearing on that one,
Yeah. Well,
or
yeah.
a report?
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, Clifford Stone, I've interviewed, I've spoken to Clifford Stone informally on the telephone before, and I've also interviewed him. Oh gosh, on FDA once for sure, and I know I did interview him on Strange Days Indeed many years ago. And Clifford Stone was part of the Moondust Project, and he's on the record as saying, he'd be at home in the middle of the night, as a 25-year-old getting a call in the middle of the night saying, meet us at your touch point, where what do they call it, where they marshal all the people, meet us there, a helicopter's going to be able to pick you up, and they fly them to South America, or they fly them to South Africa for a crash retrieval, and then they put all of their training together with how the bodies, if any, are there, with how the pieces of the craft have to be taken, the hazmat situations, all of that stuff. And Clifford Stone has it all. I mean, he's written a couple of books on it. Paula Harris has some great documentation on what he knows. So there's those kind of people that, unfortunately, Clifford's passed away, but his documentation is really, really clear. And like you said, you know, do we need hearings on that? I mean, my goodness, there are two things that we need hearings on for sure. Well, three actually. This whole documentation part, the crash retrieval stuff, and also the nuclear tampering issue. And once those three things begin to come out, some of these senators are going to just say, once again, this is the fourth time I've said it, how long has this been going on and why don't we know about it? As soon as some of these senators who are sitting around twiddling their thumbs in their chambers and with their staff, as soon as they realize that these craft of unknown origin, piloted by some non-human intelligence, can actually fly into our own atmosphere unimpeded, okay, and locate themselves over 12 or 15 nuclear assets, shut them down for 20 minutes, and then turn them back on, that's a message. They're not destroying anybody. They're not attacking anybody. But if these senators and these congressmen and these political figures realize that these UFOs can shut these things down, what does that say about the weakness of the American national security establishment that's supposed to be protecting the United States? These craft can shut these things down. That is going to be a big issue. That's going to be the other shoe that's going to drop in this whole thing. And then we can get to crash retrievals. So, it's a matter of how much more the public and politicians can absorb. Right now, they've been told there's these 140 situations that were examined. Fine, okay, 140. Well, meanwhile, the total of these things is probably 100 times that.
yeah.
You know, there's just so much that they have to become. Go back to the whole idea of getting up to speed again. that they have to realize. And I think the nuclear issue is the big one.
I think too, it's important. In the report, they're really only looking at 2004 to 2021. So now you have this giant window of all these things, for all these events that happened before that, and it's almost as if the powers that be are waiting to talk about that to control really the narrative. And like in the past progress, we talked about the language. It's all really being formed all for the public. And really, just since we're kind of ahead of the game, and a lot of the figures I guess you could say, information for are ahead of the game, it's really just the general public that this is all new. And if you're just a journalist reading this report, you're just thinking, oh, 2004, that's not that long ago. But most likely, if you're not reading into it more, if you don't have that additional knowledge, you're not going to know about all these other cases that are much more compelling. And you could even debate that there's potentially some communication here, shutting down big weapon systems. That's not, that's no coincidence. There's intent there.
Yeah, you make a really good point, because I think the main point of what you just said is that control of the narrative. That is right now. That's the up and the downside of all this. And he or she or whatever group can control this narrative has control of the perceptions and the worldview of people who are hearing it for the first time. And that's, in my estimation, that's a pretty dangerous thing, because what we're hearing in the terms of the control factor, what we're hearing is the government's point of view right now that this is a national security issue, and it could be a threat scenario. Okay, that we don't know where they're from. It's China or it's Russia, all of which are just absolute baloney. When you get right down to it. When you examine every single facet of those four things that I just mentioned, it is not a threat scenario at all. Okay, we've had 75 years and maybe even hundreds of years of interaction with these things, and there has been no takeover of the planet. They're not coming down here to have us for breakfast. Okay, that's the first thing. That we have to get by that one. So let's put that one aside. Okay, and the other thing is the idea of secrecy. Why has this been wrapped up in so much secrecy for so long? And it goes back to what you just said. It's all the control over the narrative. That's it in a nutshell. So the people who've controlled the narrative have controlled the belief system and the worldview with respect to this for 75 years. And it's up to us right now to shatter that worldview, to shatter the wall of secrecy, and to end the control of the narrative, so that we get the public to understand that what you're hearing from the government is only a minute part of this whole issue. Internationally, there are governments who know much more than what that report has just said. If you've read the Cometa report, it says much more. And that came out years ago. So the idea of controlling a narrative is something that I think we have to take onto our shoulders right now, and begin to do things like what we're doing right now to educate journalists and the public to not necessarily take what the U.S. government, because this is not the U.S. government's issue. Let's get that straight right away. This
Global.
is not. That's right. Exactly. This is not their issue. Okay. It just isn't. They'd like to pretend that it is, because they're the United States of goddamn America. We're in charge here. Yeah. So I mean, that's just not the case. This is a global issue. Every single country on the planet, every single G20 country has in some way or another had either a statement on this. They've got sighting reports. They've got data. They've got pilots who've seen these things, and we've yet to hear from them. But right now, who's controlling the narrative? It's the United States of America. And so we've got to kind of cut through that. And I don't want to be overly critical or negative about that, because what's happening is in fact a good thing. The fact that the U.S. government's doing this, but they can't continue to speak out of both sides of their mouth. Tell the truth but fudge it. Tell the truth but fudge it. They can't continue to do that. That's just unethical and it's wrong. At some point, they're going to have to play this thing right up the middle and say, "Okay, folks, let's have an honest and authentic discussion about what's really going on," and dismiss the fact that China, who is having their people 70 years ago run around in ox carts. There's no way that they've developed craft that can move at 43,000 miles an hour in their own atmosphere and not burn up or create a sonic boom. Let's put that one on the table. Yeah. And the same thing with Russia. it's all about authentic conversations about where we're going with this, and dispelling the notion that the United States is not in charge of this issue. I'm hoping
Totally.
that they might say that at some time, but
Right.
I'm not, I'm not going to hold my breath on that one.
Well, I
I've
know
got a
whenever I read any, I'm sorry, John. I
no,
know
no.
whenever I read anything about this issue, I'm sorry, read anything internationally about UFOs and anything, you always hear America saying that they came in and they got involved. Like they're the ones that told this nation, oh, hey, something's coming down, or they're the ones that
Mhm.
came in and told them how to handle it. But go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say it's kind of like the space race right now. I think what's happening is, yeah, it's like America, of course, wants to be the first country to be like, oh, we told you guys that UFOs are real. We want to be the first to tell you that this is real and this is what's happening because we want to protect you because we know more than everyone else. Even though we know that around the world, they've been looking into this topic. And again, lately I've been feeling like we're walking this line with this conversation that's happening, but because it's for Congress and it's for the the everyday common people. And for us, we've been reading and looking into this topic for years, and I've been sitting back going like, I don't even know what to say anymore. Like I can't keep talking about craft. I can't keep talking about it invading airspace because of course it's going to invade airspace because they don't care about your airspace. They don't care about any airspace. Like maybe they don't even care. Like um
So what do you tell people though, John?
I don't
What
know.
is your
That's
position on?
I've been quiet, Victor, for like a month because I've just been like
Overwhelmed?
a little overwhelmed and also a bit like, where are we going to take this conversation now? Because what you were saying earlier about the journalists and how they, if they sat down and just really looked at the topic, they understand it better. But I'm worried that right now everyone's so concerned about credibility and proving this thing to people in Congress, right? And
Yeah.
not that they're not going to talk about John Mack. They're not going to talk about the Ariel case. They're not going to talk about all these, all these things that happened in the past. They're going to talk about the Tic Tac. They're
Yeah.
going to talk about what's happening now. And a lot of the UFO community is unsatisfied with the report that came out, with the Jeremy Corbell dropped the video the other day, with
Hmm.
some footage he had, and
Hmm.
everyone's just kind of all over the place. And I've been in this not as long as you, but I've been in this for a few years, and I'm fascinated by it, and I think it's super important. I think it's going to change the way we look at the human species and the way we look at the past and the future. But I'm worried that they can only take it so far right now because society can only go so far. Society can only think so much. Like,
I
you
have to
know,
disagree there. I mean, if you look at South America, if you could look at
I'm
Peru or Brazil,
I'm in South
that
America.
exactly, yeah, the politicians, the news, they're all about it. It's a
They are
fact of
not.
life.
No, I'm in Argentina and I'm in South America, and yeah, UFOs are way more common here, and people, I go to places that are hotspots, and I've visited towns where there's lookout points to go, see UFOs, and I've been to mountains that have mysteries about UFOs inside of them. Like I've been to all these amazing places, and people do believe, but it's also not to the point where they're thinking about how it could affect human history and who we are as a species.
Well, it just
That's
Right.
if you look at it from a cultural perspective or a sociological perspective, put away the military stuff for a
yeah,
second, and the political. If you look at it from a cultural perspective, um, and this is one of the reasons why I respected the work of John Mack so much, is that he attempted to get that cultural identity to this issue. That's why he went to South Africa. That's why he went to Australia. That's why he went to different places where indigenous people have been going through these kinds of experiences for hundreds and hundreds of years. He wanted to get a full perspective on this. So if you look at indigenous people, particularly in places
yeah,
like South Africa and Australia, where it's embedded in their culture. It's like, well, yeah, tell me something I don't know. This has been going on with our culture for hundreds of years. So if you look at it from a cultural perspective, with some cultures having had this be part of their culture for so long, it's no big surprise to them.
Yeah.
And I don't, you got to give them credit for it. They're not driving down the street waving flags saying, UFOs are real and extraterrestrials are here and what are they going to do? They're not doing that. They're sitting with it, with the information. They know that it's real. They know it's part of their culture. They relay it. They retell it to their children, and their children tell it to their children, so on and so. That's why it's so alive within the culture. We have yet to reach that pinnacle of understanding in the West. We are just so egocentric with respect to what we think we know about history. And if you look at it from a cultural perspective, then we in the Western world are at a deficit, a serious deficit, and that's why you're going to the kind of feelings that you are, John. People
Yeah.
just don't want to. They're too involved with the stock markets, buying, upgrading to new houses,
Crypto.
infrastructure bills, all of
Yeah.
That's what they're involved in, and that's the nature of Western culture.
Yeah.
They think the sun shines out of their rectal cavity, and I'm sorry, it doesn't. It
Yeah.
does not. So as
No,
soon
I
as
know.
they get their heads out of their rectal cavity and realize there's another world out there, and other cultures out there that have believed this stuff for hundreds of years, then it could slowly become part of the culture. But I don't expect that to happen for a long, long time. I mean,
That's
all we want is some sort of acknowledgement and disclosure, or at least discussion in the media, and just let time take its course, because it will.
yeah.
It will eventually
Yeah.
happen. And the reason it's going to happen, guys, is because of people like you, the sort of the younger generation, who are taking this mantle forward and bringing it forward to your own constituency, and eventually hope that it becomes embedded in the political system and in the media system, so that it does, in a way, become a little bit more of a not a ho hum issue. I don't want to use that word, but a little bit more of an accepted issue within a larger portion of the public. Right now, I would think the general public, maybe 30% are sort of on board. The other 70% is going to take time for them to get up to speed on this. So you guys got a lot of work to do.
I,
We're doing it.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, it's interesting about this report. I've kind of quieted it down the last couple of years where I wouldn't deliberately bring in the woo-woo stuff into normal conversations. But now with this report, and since it's on mainstream media, it's a lot easier to slowly start talking about these things. And it's interesting. People, usually I always try to talk about what's happening with my coworkers, but I've heard somebody mention to me like their brother started talking to her about it, and he never has been into UFOs or anything like that. So I think really the report and just this circulation of it being in the mainstream media is good, but to take it back, I'm very skeptical about how it's going to evolve, and I just don't trust the journalist. No offense, I just don't trust the politicians to actually create the correct language and actually to describe the phenomena correctly. So it's kind of like a free for all almost, where Lewis is doing what he does and he's doing a lot of interviews. But if you really were to string out and listen to 20 of those interviews, it'd take a bit of time, but you'd see he's probably saying pretty much the same thing generally, but it's the anchor that really dictates the conversation. So just from some of the segments I've seen, some anchors I can't even listen to the way they speak. I can't even listen to the tone of their voice. So it's in this tough window where you have a big community. Yeah, you have a big community that are really trying to band together and like, hey, we've been looking into this for a long time. And I think now I look at it more of like a grassroots movement. I try to tell people I know, and you can tell right off the bat who's open to it, who knows what, and the ones that are afraid of it, which there's quite a bit of people who are still afraid. You can talk about UFOs, you can talk about UAPs, fear level minimal, anxiety level minimal. The second you say the E word, you say extraterrestrial, oh boy, you can feel that. You can cut the tension in the room with a knife.
Sure.
You can feel it. So I like talk about the ET stuff more so, but I realized people aren't ready yet. People aren't ready yet. We need to kind of tone back as much as the community wants to dive in that. Yeah, we have to tone back way back to almost the Roswell days, just talking about, hey, there's crafts and they're there's physics and technologies that are more advanced than ours, and I always try to bring it back to something people can relate to, and it comes to energy. It's about technology, it's about physics, and then you kind of have a foundation to say, well, what do you mean by technology? And then the conversation.
You go from there. Yeah.
But not everybody. Everybody's different. But generally, I see if you talk about physics and technology, they're like, oh, okay. And don't talk about the green men yet. In time, I do believe that for sure. But
yeah, because then you'll lose everybody if you talk about because that's where you go into the woo-woo. Well, usually the communication method is telepathic.
Hang on a second.
Can I
Wait a
say
minute here.
one thing? Without the woo, without the unconventional thinkers, boys, we would never be where we are today. Because Stan Friedman,
This is right.
John Mack, all these people that looked into this, they were considered woo at one point in time. They were considered unconventional. They were going against the grain. And if we lose that, the conversation is going to stay in one lane.
Yeah, you got to be careful. Yeah,
we're going to lose the whole. If we didn't know about Betty and Barney Hill or John Mack or Travis
McDonald.
Even Carl Jung too is a very early father in ufology as well. Probably one of
I mean, it's not all about craft.
Yeah, it's all a matter of knowing how to push. You can push an idea to a point where people turn you off, but if you ask the right questions, or if you bring up the right issues, and you get people, if you frame the question properly, whatever you want to say, if you frame it in a non-threatening way, and you frame it in a way that will allow people to open their minds for about 5 seconds, and not think about what they're going to say, but think about what you've just said. And if you frame it properly, what happens is you don't fill their head with knowledge, you create a question in their mind, and if they come back to you with a question, a really good question about what you've just said, you got them. Because you haven't forced it, and you haven't forced something on them. You've created a question in their mind to say, well, what did you mean by that? You really want to know? Let me tell you. And then you go on and you raise other questions. So you get them coming towards you rather than pushing them too hard. So it's a bit of a soft push and a gentle pull. Soft push and a gentle pull. And that's what that is. You know what that is? That's good teaching. I'm a teacher by career, okay? So I know what it's like to stand in front of, children for 185 days a year and try to teach them division of fractions. To begin with, they won't have a clue what I'm talking about. So what I've got to do is introduce it in a way that they say, sir, what do you mean? As soon as I've got their attention, then I drop a little bit at a time on their plate and have them digest that a little bit at a time. And that takes a lot of patience, takes a lot of time. And I think that's generally speaking where we're at right now. Because if we push too hard, as someone said earlier, we're going to lose a lot of people. Yeah. So we have to judiciously keep in mind that how you have dialogue with people, as simplistic as they might be or as irrelevant as they might seem at the time because they're only just co-workers or your family, if we keep on doing that, those little pushes and pulls will eventually come and they'll turn into complete enlightenment where the people want to find out more. And that's what we have to do with journalists. Put the right questions in front of them so that they begin asking you questions. As soon as they start asking questions, you got them. If they're pushing you with other things like, yes, what about that? Yes, what about this? What about that? It's the whole what about thing. No, you got to stay away from that. You got to really get them to a point where they're coming towards you. And as soon as they ask a question, what I say to them, and I've said this in interviews before, guys, journalists will ask me a question. Do you really want to know? What technology? Do you really want to know about the technology? Or are you just asking that question as a throwaway? Oh no, I really want to. Then then you just launch full at it. Well, the technology means that these things can move at or beyond the speed of light. Oh really? Well, that's impossible. Well, no, it's not impossible because that's just. Then you get into other things with respect to that. So, like I said, it's a gentle push and a gentle pull.
Well, that kind of soft-spoken dialogue would be great in theory, but we all know that the majority of the public get their information from mainstream news, and mainstream news likes to push the scary headlines. You should be afraid. This is why you should be afraid. And if you look at the reports, it focuses quite heavily on they're outperforming US technology. And if you add the nuclear issue on top of that, people are going to get scared, and the news will grapple onto that and it will use it. And the threat scenario will be pushed hard unless it's taken in another direction very quickly.
Yeah, just have to be a push back with that when it comes to the threat scenario, because we're still here.
Mm-hmm.
We you know.
Yeah, and don't get me
Can
wrong. I'm not saying that um, uh, that people don't get their ideas from the mainstream news. In fact, they do. But you got to understand that that's the job of the mainstream media, for the most part, to reinforce the status quo, to reinforce the threat scenario with anything. It doesn't really matter what it is. Okay, the U.S. is pulling out of Afghanistan in a way that's a good thing. But other people say no, they're abdicating their responsibilities in the Middle East. So I mean, how do you reconcile those two issues? The only way you can is by engaging in a meaningful dialogue to understand why the negative parts of that move are important and why the positive moves are important. So in the middle of that, there's diplomacy, and understanding that the language of diplomacy tells you that this is not a polemic idea. It's not a black and white issue. There's a whole lot of gray in here. So, but at some point,
Gray.
you have to deal with the gray. That's the one thing you got to do, and using the right language and the right rhetoric and the soft push and the soft pull. But you also have to be in a position of saying, "Hey, guys, sit down, shut the fuck up, and listen to me." Okay, deliver the critical message. Pardon my language, but deliver the critical message. And the critical message is we are not alone in the cosmos, and craft of unknown origin are visiting here, and they're being piloted by sentient beings who could be up to hundreds of thousands of years in advance from us. Deal with that. Deal with that issue. Never mind whether it's true or not. Deal with the possibility that it is, in fact, real. So that's the critical message. And as I said before, as a teacher, you can kind of, wade through that diplomatically. But at some point, you have to draw the card of delivering the critical message. Okay, so and let me run another scenario by you in terms of behavior. Okay, behavior is a function of information and attitude. Okay, so what you do, especially with kids, and adults are like this too, so I'm not making any differentiation between the two. In order to change behavior, you have to change attitudes. You can't pump them full of information. That's not going to work entirely. You have to get people to understand that in order to move towards more enlightenment, or in terms of becoming better educated, we have to change the attitude of the learner. And that's where this idea of diplomacy, proper language comes in, and also of delivering the critical message at a certain point in time. You can't do it all the time. You can't use the hammer all the time. But at some point, you have to deliver that message. And especially now with the media, we have to tell some of these journalists to listen. You're going up a blind alley here by using the threat scenario, by being thinking that the nuclear issue is going to be a threat to you. Okay, understand what the issue is all about, and the fear disappears. The threat disappears once you understand the issue. And that's our role in all of this. We have to get people to a point where they change their attitude, and that attitude changes their behavior. And it's a basic tool in teaching.
Yeah, I guess my question with that is the best way to get a hold of journalists, because I have a feeling they're getting thousands of tweets and thousands of
Well,
people saying this is this and this is that. Look at
mhm.
the abductions and look at this. Oh, come
Oh yeah.
on. And so it's like, how do you get to the journalists with the right information where I don't know. I
Tough
feel like
job.
they might be inundated. Go ahead.
No, tough job. It is. I mean, that's one of the things that I try to do as Zland Communications, is try to sift the information out in digestible bits so that people can understand one issue at a time, and say you can't look at this whole thing all at once. I mean, right now, at any point in time, a million things are happening at this point. Right now, everything is happening all at once. See, oh, that just happened. Oh, that just happened. It's happening all the time. That's what time is like. Things happen every single microsecond on the planet. And the thing to understand is you cannot focus on every single one of those things all at once. You just can't do it. It's impossible for the human psyche to deal with everything that's happening at this point in time. I mean, within the last 30 seconds, a million billion things have happened on the planet. You can't digest them all. So what do you do to understand that? And if you attempt to understand everything all at once, you blow your head off. I mean, you just cannot do it. So what you have to do is to slow things down, bring it to a point where people are they're listening to you, and they have confidence in you, and they trust you. Once you build that confidence and trust, then you can deliver the information. Then you can deliver the critical message. If you get them to focus on things, one thing at a time, or at least a couple of things at a time. So I mean, and I don't envy some of the journalists that are out there right now. Everything's coming at them all. The sky is falling as far as they're concerned.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Well, I want to just call out to everyone if you want to have final question on this topic. And Victor, I don't know if you already covered your nuke topic because you wanted us to keep on topic or keep remind you of that, but we also wanted to keep it to about an hour. So
Sure.
It's fine if we go over, but I just want to let everyone know.
I just want to very quickly about the nuclear issue. My good friend Captain Robert Salas, who was at Malmstrom Air Force Base in the late '60s, and he was part of that incident at Malmstrom Air Force Base where 12 missiles got shut down inexplicably when a red craft was hovering over, and he has 6 affidavits of other launch commanders who were in their bunkers and went through exactly the same thing in different ways, but the same kind of situation where 10 or 12 missiles were shut down over a period of time. And those affidavits are available to the public. And myself and some other people are going to attempt to get these documents into the hands of journalists. That's part of the whole scenario as to what we have to provide for them to understand that this nuclear issue could be the factor that will change a lot of people's minds with respect to A, that these craft are here, B, what they're doing, and they're not shutting down these missiles to destroy them. They could easily destroy them as far as I'm concerned, but they're also here to send us a message that you got to stop doing this. You have to stop the proliferation of the nuclear capabilities, and then after that, we have to realize that we cannot take these things into space. That's the big problem, and we all know that one of the things that happened back in the early '40s and in the late '40s is we exploded the first couple of nuclear weapons at White Sands. All of a sudden, these damn UFOs start showing up, and the fact of the matter is, these nuclear weapons, and I don't understand the physics behind it, but they disrupt time and space beyond the planet, and the extraterrestrials realize that. So they came and they said, "Oh my God, the kids have found the matches," and so ever since then, we've had situations where the nuclear situation here has been under constant monitoring by the extraterrestrials, and they are going to be very, very clear to us. You guys got to stop that stuff. Put it away, stop it. The proliferation has to stop. And then on top of that, if you continue to use these things and bring them into space and have them in your arsenals as you travel through space, we're not going to let you do that. We will quarantine the planet. And that's the message that some of the contactees are getting. Stop the nuclear proliferation. So it's in our best interest to understand that fact, because we won't be able to become a starfaring race or civilization until we stop this whole nuclear proliferation.
I cannot understand. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Like the UK ordered new nukes. But I imagine they know on the highest level that aliens are very much interested in nuclear weapons, in our nuclear weapons. But still, they create new weapons, nuclear weapons. How can you justify that, knowing that some intelligence is watching, and yet you create new weapons? I cannot imagine.
The
Power and
UK
control.
is
Power and
replacing,
Sorry.
control.
the UK is replacing their nuclear weapons, so they're not
Oh,
increasing.
okay.
But
Okay.
it was a very political issue in the last election.
Yeah.
That's the main impetus behind it.
And I'd also say that, I mean, talking about or saying, knowing that there's an extraterrestrial presence that cares about this, why are we still doing that? Because to most people, it's not real, and the government will just say, well, most people don't care about that. We still need to protect ourselves now against this adversary and so forth. But I get what you're saying, but it's like when the ET presence thing isn't even real on 70% of the globe, like just 30% of us are going, hey, something's going on, and we know that something's going on. But I get it. I know what you're saying.
I would say let's like always like keep it real. Like the thing about extraterrestrials, we have this image, this idea that they are bearers of intelligence and bringing us good. I don't think extraterrestrials are bad or good. I believe that just like us, you might meet an extraterrestrial. If it's an intelligent, conscious being, it could do anything. It could have any kind of opinion, and maybe there's a group that are positive. Maybe there's a group that don't like us too much.
Well, the
That would make
military
perfect
apparently
sense.
says there are definitely malevolent beings and benevolent ones, and there's other testimonial
I
from
mean,
military that say we're working
it's
with them.
it's common sense. I mean, it's like, yeah. I mean, obviously, like, why not? For us to believe that they're all good and they're all telling us positive things or things to take us into the future or whatever, it's like we have to really come into contact and really analyze the situation and really, if I were, for example, to come into contact with an extraterrestrial and it started showing me things, I would definitely leave that situation like, okay, I don't know if I really trust this thing and what it just said to me.
Right.
I'm not sure. I would listen to it. I would listen to what it's saying. I would try to be open and like anytime somebody grabs me and pulls me aside. But if somebody grabs me and pulls me inside and starts talking about destroying nuclear weapons and things like that, I'm going to listen to them, but they've got to really like prove it to me. One thing I keep saying too is with this threat narrative, everyone's worried about the threat narrative, but if the phenomenon or these ETs really care about us, why don't they just step in and say, hey, look, we're not a threat. We're super intelligent beings. We figured out a way to communicate with you guys without being a threat. So here, guys,
Absolutely.
calm down. The government's playing you guys. Like,
Yeah.
that's what I would do if I was a super intelligent being. I'd be like, okay, let's devise a plan between 50 of us here on this ship on how we're gonna make contact with these guys without freaking them out or starting a war or whatever. Because
But
we've been
John, they're
here for
following universal laws that say they're not supposed to mess with non-spacefaring races.
I'm
And
saying it just I get to a certain point sometimes where I'm like, man, like what would I do? How would I handle this situation? Because I also wonder if I think I brought this up last time we talked, where people get radiation burns from coming in close contact with craft. People get sick from losing hair. They get like not everything is positive. A lot of abductees have negative experiences, and we can't forget that. Some abductees have beautiful experiences, and I think it's awesome. Just like it's like life. I'm saying sometimes you come into contact with somebody and it's a beautiful experience, and sometimes you come into contact with somebody and it's the worst experience you've ever had in your life. And just if they are intelligent and they are what we're talking about, then we should always consider that, never take it off the
we'll
table.
make sure to have you on for the future streams of abductees and experiencers, because
definitely,
they've got some important and interesting things to say.
Definitely.
And how would you guys imagine we're dealing with artificial intelligence? So I mean, like ancient alien artificial intelligence coming from elsewhere.
Yeah.
How would that be considered? Would we consider it malevolent, benevolent, or
that's
indifferent?
whole
That's
other
another
topic.
show.
Programming.
Yeah, but it's really a discussion that is now very vivid. I mean,
Absolutely.
everybody's
that's for
talking
another
about
stream.
it. Yeah, yeah, maybe.
But we've got about an hour. Any last words here from anyone? No?
It's
All
been
right. Well,
been a great discussion. Thanks
very
very much.
well. Thank you, Victor. Again, we will always be happy to have you on. We appreciate you coming on. Again, if anyone wants to find Victor, that would be at zlandcommunications.com. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep. That's right.
Also, I wanted to ask about your podcast. Is your podcast found where podcasts are are happily distributed on most apps. I find it only on Google when I search.
It's on Spotify,
Okay.
and well, if you go to Anchor, and that'll allow you to get to Anchor, it's there, and then you can also look on Spotify
Okay.
on your television
Ex-
or on your computer or whatever. So yeah, and we're getting set to launch a new series of interviews on the files of the Disclosure Agency. So it's going to be an exciting time. Looking forward to that.
Okay. That's great. And then go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that if you want to keep pace with this stuff, because of things that are unfolding with respect to what's happening within the next 90 days with the update to Congress, and I don't want to focus too much necessarily on stuff that's happening with respect to the report, but I'm thinking that this is one of the major ways that people have to kind of get into it and really kind of realize there's a sequence of things that are going to be happening. So I'm hoping that we can do this again, and keep people updated on what's unfolding and what the implications are of all of this. So I think that's really important to not just talk about what's happening, but what the future implications are and what comes next after that all the time. So it's
Well, you just let us know whenever you want to come on. You are
Sure.
always welcome if you want to give us an update. That is absolutely
we'll stay in
for
touch.
sure. Any other
Yes.
questions from anyone
Perfect.
else?
Oh, thank you very
Excellent.
much for doing this.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Well,
Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming on. All the UFOB team. The Undead Gaucho can be found on YouTube at his channel, The Undead Gaucho. And in Argentina. I didn't realize you were in Argentina. That's great.
Yes.
Thanks again for making it with us. And I think that's about it. So we are going to sign off. So thank you everyone for watching. And we will see you on the UFOB channel, and feel free to join the Discord as well for more updates and fun conversations. Good night, everyone.
Bye bye. Bye bye.